My name is Jenna, and I'm 29 years old. I work as a nurse at St. Mark's Hospital, where Christmas never really feels like Christmas. It's all fluorescent lights, soft beeping monitors, and families praying their loved ones make it through the night. I guess that's why I always tried so hard to make the holidays matter at home, to feel like I still belonged somewhere. But last Christmas taught me that some families can look perfect from the outside and still be broken beyond repair. The snow was falling in soft white ribbons that evening as I drove down Maple Lane toward my parents' house. Every porch was wrapped in twinkling lights, every window glowing with warmth. My car heater wheezed weakly against the cold, and I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, tired eyes, still in light makeup from my shift, trying to look cheerful. I had even wrapped small gifts for everyone, a new scarf for Mom, a book for Dad, and something thoughtful for each of my siblings. I thought maybe this year would be different. Maybe they'd finally make room for me. When I walked through the front door, the familiar scent of pine and cinnamon hit me. Mom was in the kitchen, her gold bracelets jingling as she stirred gravy. She looked beautiful, as always put together. Calm, untouchable. "Oh," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Jenna, you're early." There was no hug, no smile. Just surprise, like she'd forgotten I existed. In the living room, my sister Chloe was perched by the fire, a glass of wine in hand, her laughter sharp and practiced. Her husband Ryan sat close beside her, wearing the smug expression of someone who'd already had too much to drink. My brother Ethan was by the tree, showing Dad his new smartwatch, both of them chuckling over some inside joke I wasn't part of. I tried to speak, but my words barely made a dent in their noise. The dining table gleamed beneath the chandelier, set with fine china and gold-rimmed glasses. Everything looked perfect, except for one detail that stopped me cold. There were only 6 chairs. I counted twice. 6. One less than the number of people in the room. "Where should I sit?" I asked quietly, hoping someone would notice how absurd that question even sounded. Mom didn't turn from the stove. "Oh, Jenna, we didn't think you'd make it this year. You're always working through the holidays. We just kept it simple." I felt the blood drain from my face. Chloe smirked into her glass. "You can grab a folding chair from the corner if you want. It's no big deal." No big deal. To them it never was. So I fetched a folding chair, unfolded it next to the table, and sat there quietly while everyone else laughed and toasted to family. My mother didn't even glance my way when she passed the dishes. They talked about vacations and promotions, about Ethan's new car and Chloe's big client. No one asked how I was, or how many lives I'd tried to save this week. Every laugh felt like a knife twisting slowly. Every glance that slid past me reminded me that I was invisible here. I chewed food that tasted like dust, swallowing down the hurt because I'd learned long ago that tears only made them roll their eyes. When dessert came, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, forcing a brittle smile. "I have to go," I said. "A patient needs me." It was a lie, of course, but they didn't ask which one. They didn't even look up as I left. Outside, the snow had thickened, blanketing the world in silence. I stood by my car, the cold biting through my gloves, and stared at the warm glow inside the house. For the first time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt something else, something sharper, colder, cleaner. They had left me no seat at their table. But one day, I promised myself, I'd leave them nothing to sit on. I didn't go home after that Christmas dinner. I couldn't. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets until the snow made it too dangerous to keep going. I pulled into a gas station, parked under the yellow glow of the lights, and just sat there. My hands were still trembling on the steering wheel. I'd spent years forgiving my family for making me feel small, convincing myself that love was supposed to be unconditional. But that night, sitting in the driver's seat with tears freezing on my cheeks, I realized something painful sometimes. Love isn't enough to earn you a place at the table. The next morning, I woke up in my tiny apartment to the hum of the heater and the faint sound of Christmas carols from the neighbors. I poured coffee and stared at the unopened gifts I had wrapped for my family, still stacked neatly by the door. I didn't have the heart to throw them away. Instead, I packed them into a box and pushed it into the back of my closet. Like all the other moments I'd rather forget. It wasn't the first time they'd left me out. When I was 10, Chloe had a birthday party, and Mom told me to help serve the cake instead of joining the other girls. At 15, when I got accepted into a summer science program, Dad barely acknowledged it. Ethan had made the varsity team that week, and that was all that mattered. When I graduated nursing school with honors, my mother didn't even show up to the ceremony. She said she was too tired from planning Chloe's engagement dinner. I used to tell myself they weren't cruel, just busy. But the truth was simpler. I was convenient when they needed help, invisible when they didn't. The only person who ever saw me for who I was had been my grandmother, Nora. She was different, quiet, gentle, always smelling of lavender and peppermint tea. When I was little, I'd sit with her on the porch and listen to stories about her life, how she grew up during hard times, how she believed kindness was strength, not weakness. "Don't let them take your light, Jenna," she'd tell me. "People like us, we give too much, but one day, giving will be your power." After she passed 2 years ago, the family barely mentioned her. I had gone to her funeral alone. My mother said she couldn't handle another emotional event. That morning, I drove to the cemetery with a small wreath of holly and pine. The snow crunched under my boots as I knelt before her headstone. "Hi, Grandma," I whispered, brushing the snow away from her name. "You were right about them. They'll never see me, not the way you did." My voice cracked, but the wind carried it softly through the rows of graves. "I miss you." As I stood, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A number I didn't recognize flashed on the screen. "Hello? Is this Jenna Miles?" a man's voice asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "My name is Charles Bennett. I'm calling on behalf of the law firm of Henderson & Co. It's regarding the estate of your late grandmother, Nora Miles." I froze. What about it?" "There's been some confusion with the paperwork," he said. "Your presence is requested at a review of her will next Thursday. You're listed as a beneficiary." My heart skipped. Beneficiary? No one in my family had ever mentioned anything about that. "I thought everything was already settled," I said. "There are additional documents we've discovered," he replied carefully. "It's important you attend." When the call ended, I just stood there in the snow, the phone heavy in my hand. My grandmother had left me something, but my family hadn't told me. They'd kept it a secret. That night, I sat on the couch, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the dark window. All those years of being invisible suddenly felt like preparation for something else, something I wasn't supposed to see coming. Maybe they thought I'd stay silent forever. Maybe they thought I'd keep folding chairs and smiling politely. But they didn't know what I was capable of when I finally had nothing left to lose. The following Thursday, I stood outside the brick building of Henderson & Co., clutching my purse like it might anchor me. The air smelled faintly of snow and exhaust, and my heart hammered as if I were walking into surgery. I didn't tell anyone I was coming, not my mother, not Chloe, not Ethan. I wanted to see their faces when I showed up. I wanted them to know I wasn't invisible anymore. When I stepped into the reception area, the secretary's polite smile faltered. "Oh, you must be Jenna Miles," she said. "They're already inside." They. Of course they were. I followed her down a narrow hallway into a conference room lined with shelves of law books. My family sat around the polished oak table like they were at brunch, not a will reading. Mom was in her usual beige sweater, hands folded neatly in front of her. Chloe was scrolling through her phone, Ryan beside her. Ethan looked vaguely uncomfortable, his tie too tight. The room went silent when they saw me. "Jenna?" Mom's voice sharpened like a knife. "What are you doing here?" I forced a calm smile. "I was invited." Before she could respond, a man in a gray suit entered. The lawyer, Charles Bennett. "Ah, Miss Miles. Good, you're here." He shuffled a stack of papers and took a seat at the head of the table. "We'll begin." He explained that this was a continuation of Nora's estate settlement. My family exchanged glances, clearly unaware of any continuation. He began reading the will. Nora's home, savings and antiques were all to be divided among Elaine, my mother, Chloe, and Ethan. Chloe smirked, glancing at me as if to say, "See?" But then Charles cleared his throat and turned a page. "There is an additional clause," he said. "One that was not disclosed in the initial review." Mom's smile faltered. "What clause?" Charles adjusted his glasses and read aloud. "To my granddaughter Jenna Miles, I leave my lake house on Willow Point, all personal journals, and my collection of letters, along with my enduring faith that she will do what is right when the time comes." The room fell into a heavy silence. Chloe gave a small laugh, brittle and mean. "Letters and a shack? How sentimental." But I could hear something else in her tone: nervousness. Mom leaned forward. "That property is barely worth anything," she said tightly. Mother probably just meant it as a gesture. Charles raised an eyebrow. "Actually, Mrs. Miles, the Willow Point property was reassessed recently. It's now valued at nearly $400,000, and the letters Mrs. Miles referred to them as the heart of my legacy." Ethan's eyes darted to Mom's. "Did you know about this?" She shook her head quickly. "Of course not." But her fingers twisted the hem of her sleeve. I sat still, keeping my expression neutral even as my pulse raced. Grandma Nora hadn't forgotten me. She had planned something none of them understood yet. Charles continued, "Mrs. Miles also left a personal message, which I've been instructed to read aloud." He unfolded a single page. "To my family, I hope these gifts bring you peace, not envy. And to my Jenna, when the truth finds you, let it guide your heart, not your anger." Everyone stared at me. I could feel their resentment filling the air like smoke. Mom finally said, "Well, I suppose that's that. Come along, everyone." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. But before she reached the door, Charles spoke again. "One more thing. Mrs. Miles' will includes an alternate clause, one that designates Jenna as executor should any question of integrity arise regarding the estate." The room froze. Chloe's hand tightened on her wine-red purse. "Integrity?" she snapped. "What's that supposed to mean?" Charles met her gaze calmly. "It means that if evidence of misconduct ever surfaces, Jenna has full authority to decide who receives what." Mom's voice trembled. "That's absurd. Mother would never." But I could tell she was lying. Her face had gone pale. As we filed out of the room, Chloe brushed past me, hissing under her breath, "Don't get comfortable, Jenna. You don't deserve any of this." I smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But it's not you who gets to decide that anymore." Outside, the winter air hit me like a shock. I clutched the sealed box of letters Charles had given me and walked toward my car, the snow crunching beneath my boots. My breath came out in visible bursts as I whispered to myself, "Whatever you wanted me to find, Grandma, I'll find it." The lake house sat on the edge of Willow Point, wrapped in fog and silence. It was small and old, with peeling paint and shutters that groaned in the wind. But the moment I stepped inside, I could feel her there, my grandmother. Her presence lingered in the faint scent of lavender, in the way the afternoon light spilled across the floorboards. I closed the door behind me and stood for a long moment, just breathing it in. The sealed box of letters sat on the kitchen table where I'd placed it earlier that morning. My hands trembled as I opened the lid. Inside were dozens of envelopes, some yellowed with age, others newer, tied neatly with a ribbon. Each was labeled with a date and a name written in my grandmother's looping cursive. I lifted the first one carefully. "To my sweet Jenna, Christmas 2015. Her handwriting brought tears to my eyes before I even began reading. "My dear girl, I know you feel unseen. I've watched how your mother's words bruise you and how your siblings look past you. But one day, their blindness will cost them everything, and you'll see that kindness, even when unreturned, leaves a mark deeper than cruelty ever could." I wiped my tears and reached for another letter. Each one painted a portrait of the woman I remembered, gentle, wise, but burdened by guilt. Then, halfway through the stack, I found one marked differently. The envelope was red, sealed with a gold sticker, and labeled only, "For Jenna, Truth." My stomach tightened as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter that began not with affection, but confession. "If you're reading this, it means your mother has already taken what she believed was hers. I tried to protect what little remained, but deceit runs deep in our family, and I was too old to fight it all. You must know the truth. Jenna Elaine forged my signature more than once. The documents she filed for my retirement account, the loan she claimed I approved, they were lies." I read those lines over and over, my pulse pounding in my ears. My mother forged her own mother's signature? The next few paragraphs detailed transactions, dates, even names of witnesses. My grandmother had kept everything, even copies of what had been taken from her. My hands shook as I reached into the box and found small slips of paper bank statements, receipts, notes scribbled in Nora's careful handwriting. Proof. But it didn't stop there. A second envelope, tucked beneath the others, bore my sister's name, Chloe. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Chloe came to me crying one night, terrified. She had helped her mother falsify an insurance claim. I forgave her, but I couldn't forget. I left this knowledge not as revenge, but as a lesson. Secrets rot the soul, Jenna. Don't let theirs infect yours. I sat back in the chair, my chest tight. My family, the people who had treated me like a disappointment, had built their comfort on lies. At the bottom of the box, one last envelope lay sealed with thick wax. The front read, "For Jenna's eyes only." The paper inside wasn't a letter, it was a legal document, notarized and dated 2 years ago. I scanned the words once, twice, 3 times before they sank in. It was an amendment to my grandmother's will, the same clause Charles had mentioned only now. I held the proof. I pressed the paper to my chest and whispered, "You knew this would happen, didn't you, Grandma?" Outside, the lake was still, frozen at the edges. The wind rattled the shutters as if whispering back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten one. I was the one holding the truth, and they had no idea how much power it carried. As the last of the daylight faded, I stacked the letters neatly and locked them in a drawer. Tomorrow, I'd call Charles. I needed to know exactly how much control that amendment gave me, because for once, I had the upper hand. And I was just beginning to understand how to use it. I didn't sleep that night. The wind off the lake moaned through the shutters, and every sound felt like a whisper from the past. I kept seeing the words from Grandma Nora's amendment in my mind. "Jenna Miles shall hold full discretion over all remaining assets." Full discretion. Those 2 words pulsed through me like electricity. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted. When the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains, I sat at the kitchen table, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in my hands. The documents lay spread before me like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I was ready to solve. I thought about the faces of my family around that Christmas table, the laughter, the condescension, the empty chair that had been mine. My heart ached, but underneath that ache was something else. A slow, steady anger that had been building for years. I could destroy them with what I had. I knew that. The proof of their fraud, the amendment in my name, the secrets that could unravel everything they'd built. But revenge wasn't what Grandma had wanted, was it? Her words echoed in my head. "Let truth guide your heart, not your anger." Still, truth and anger felt like the same thing right now. I got dressed and drove into town, hoping movement might clear my head. The coffee shop near the hospital was quiet that morning. A few regulars nodded at me, familiar faces from my night shifts. I sat in the corner, pulling out my phone to call Charles Bennett, the lawyer. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Miles? Hi. It's Jenna. I've been going through the letters and the amendment my grandmother left." There was a pause. "I see. Have you found additional information?" "Yes," I said carefully. "Enough to confirm what she suspected about my mother. And more." he sighed, the sound heavy with understanding. Then you know what that means. The authority to act lies entirely with you now. You can enforce the amendment or keep things as they are. But if you proceed, it will get ugly. I'm not afraid of ugly, I said quietly. I've lived with it my whole life. He hesitated. Before you decide, Miss Miles, may I offer some advice? Go ahead. Power can cleanse or corrupt. Use it wisely, Mrs. Miles didn't give you that authority out of vengeance. She gave it to you because she believed you were the only one who'd handle it with integrity. After the call, I sat for a long while staring at the screen. Integrity. That word used to mean keeping quiet, keeping peace, but now it felt more like breaking a silence that had been rotting for years. When I left the coffee shop, snow had begun to fall again. I drove to Street Marks and slipped into the small hospital chapel. The air was still, the stained glass windows casting soft colors over the wooden pews. I knelt and whispered into the quiet, "Grandma, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, but they took everything from you, from me, from what family is supposed to mean." My voice trembled, but I didn't cry this time. Instead, I felt a calm settle over me, steady, deliberate, unshakable. That evening, I called Charles again. "I've made my decision," I told him. He didn't sound surprised. "Then I'll arrange the necessary documents. You'll need to meet with your family again for the official transfer." "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning." I hung up and stared out the window at the lake. The reflection of the moon rippled over the dark water, cold and perfect. For the first time, I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter, the invisible nurse, the unwanted guest. They had left me no seat at their table. Tomorrow, I would take the whole table away. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. My body felt tense but steady, the way it does before a difficult shift at the hospital when you know something's about to happen. But you can't quite name it. I ironed my blouse, brushed my hair, and slipped on the silver necklace my grandmother had given me when I graduated. "You'll know when to wear it," she'd said back then. Maybe this was what she'd meant. By the time I reached Henderson & Co., my family's cars were already lined up in the parking lot. I paused outside, watching my breath cloud the cold air. For a moment, the nurse in me wanted to fix things, to smooth everything over, to find peace. But the woman standing there wasn't that girl anymore. I squared my shoulders and walked inside. The conference room was exactly as it had been the week before: polished table, heavy curtains, quiet tension. My mother, Elaine, sat at the head of the table, her back rigid, her lips drawn tight. Chloe sat beside her, phone in hand, scrolling as if the world outside didn't exist. Ethan sat near the end, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When I entered, conversation stopped. "Well," Mom said, forcing a thin smile. "If it isn't the prodigal daughter." I met her eyes. "I'm here for the meeting." Charles, Bennett entered moments later, holding a manila folder. He greeted everyone politely before sitting down. "Thank you for coming. As per Mrs. Nora Miles' amended will, this meeting is to discuss the matter of estate control." Mom frowned. "We already went through this, Charles. My mother's will has been settled." He adjusted his glasses. "Not entirely. Miss Jenna Miles has decided to enact the discretionary clause, meaning she is assuming full authority over the estate's remaining assets and distributions." The room erupted. Chloe slammed her phone down. "You can't just decide that." "It's not a decision," Charles said calmly. "It's a legal right granted by the decedent's amendment. Your grandmother made it very clear." Mom's face reddened. She was old, confused, manipulated probably. Jenna must have enough. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't back down. "I didn't manipulate her. She trusted me because I didn't lie to her." Ethan shifted uneasily. "What does this mean exactly?" Charles opened the folder. "It means Jenna will review all prior financial activity and determine new distributions as she sees fit. She also holds the authority to freeze or liquidate accounts tied to the estate." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then my mother laughed a brittle, humorless sound. You? You think you can handle that kind of responsibility? You've been a nurse your whole life, Jenna. You're not one of us. Something in me broke, but not in the way it used to. Not from pain this time. It was release. You're right, I said softly. I'm not one of you. I don't lie. I don't steal. And I don't pretend family means nothing. Chloe stood up, voice trembling. This is insane. Mom, do something. But before Elaine could respond, Charles handed me a pen. Miss Miles, please sign here to finalize the transfer of authority. I signed. My name. Looked unfamiliar, stronger somehow. When I set the pen down, Elaine's chair scraped violently against the floor. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed. After everything we've done for you. I met her gaze. Everything you've done to me, you mean. Her hand flew before I even saw it coming. The slap stung across my cheek, the sound echoing through the room. But I didn't move. I didn't even flinch. Charles stood abruptly. Mrs. Miles, that's enough. I looked straight into her eyes and said, calm and even. You'll regret that. She blinked, her anger faltering for the first time. I turned, picked up the folder, and walked out of the room without another word. Outside, the winter air burned against my skin where her hand had struck me, but it only made me feel more alive. For years, they'd dismissed me as the quiet one, the one who wouldn't fight back. And the real fight was only beginning. The story spread faster than I could have imagined. By the end of that week, everyone in town knew that Nora Miles' estate had been turned upside down and that I was the one holding the reins. At first, I tried to ignore the whispers. I buried myself in work at the hospital, focusing on my patients, the hum of machines, the rhythm of the life I could still control. But gossip, like infection, spreads quietly before it consumes everything. By Monday morning, 3 of my co-workers were already whispering near the nurse's station when I walked in. They smiled when I passed, but their eyes lingered. That's her. I heard one of them murmur. The one who inherited all that money. I didn't correct them. They wouldn't have believed the truth anyway, that what I'd inherited wasn't wealth, but a battlefield. At home, the phone calls started. First from Chloe. Then from my mother. Then from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all, my voicemail filled with a mix of anger and guilt, accusations wrapped in fake concern. Jenna, this has gone too far. My mother's voice pleaded in one message. You're humiliating us. Please, call me back so we can fix this privately. But there was no fixing left to do. She didn't want peace. She wanted control. That night, I made tea and sat by the window of the lake house. Snow fell softly outside, the kind that looks peaceful until you realize how quickly it buries things. My grandmother's words played in my head again, let truth guide your heart. So, I let it. The first step was reviewing the estate's accounts. What I found made my stomach twist, large, unexplained withdrawals from Nora's savings months before her death. Loans in Elaine's name, some under the pretense of family expenses. A transfer of property shares to Chloe and Ryan just weeks before Nora's hospitalization. Ethan's name was on almost nothing, confirming what I'd long suspected: he was a bystander, not an accomplice. The documents confirmed what Nora's letters had hinted at. My mother had been siphoning from her own mother's accounts. Chloe had helped cover it up, and now both of them were terrified, not because of what I might do but because I had proof. I took photos of every file and sent digital copies to Charles for safekeeping. You're doing the right thing, he said quietly when I called. But you should prepare yourself. They won't take this lightly. He was right. By Wednesday, my family's perfect image began to crack. A mutual friend from church called to tell me that Elaine had been crying in front of everyone, saying I was trying to ruin her life. Chloe posted a cryptic message on social media. Some people will do anything for attention, even betray blood. The post racked up sympathetic comments within minutes. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't need to shout. Then, one evening, I came home to find an envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with shaky handwriting. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I could almost hear Chloe's voice in the words cold, rehearsed, venomous. I should have been afraid. But I wasn't. Not anymore. Fear was a luxury I'd spent too many years indulging. Now, there was only focus. I walked down to the frozen lake that night, my boots crunching against the snow. The moonlight shimmered on the ice, turning the world silver and still. I knelt by the shore and whispered, "They won't stop until I finish what you started, Grandma. I promise I will." The wind rose, scattering snow like ash across the surface of the lake. It felt like a sign. Quiet but certain, nature itself urging me forward. Because sometimes, peace isn't found in forgiveness. Sometimes, it's found in the wreckage of what never should have survived. The morning after the anonymous note arrived, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lake house was trying to tell me something. The air inside felt charged, restless, as though my grandmother's secrets still clung to the walls, waiting to be uncovered. I spent hours pacing the creaky floors, replaying every word of her letters in my mind. She'd mentioned records once, something about a drawer she never wanted Elaine to find. By noon, I decided to look for it. The wind outside howled through the trees, and the old house groaned under the pressure of the storm building over the lake. It was the kind of day when memories came alive. The study was small, tucked behind the kitchen, filled with dust and the faint smell of cedar. My grandmother's desk sat in the corner, an antique with brass handles and a single locked drawer. I crouched down and tugged gently, no luck. But when I pressed my hand against the underside, I felt something taped there. A small silver key. My breath caught. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside were folders, envelopes, and a small leather journal. Everything was organized neatly, as though she had known I'd be the one to find it. The first folder contained old loan papers, names, signatures, and amounts that made my stomach twist. Elaine's name appeared again and again, alongside a mountain of unpaid debt. My mother had borrowed heavily from multiple sources, using Nora's name to secure the loans. Some were paid off, others weren't. There were even letters from creditors threatening legal action. As I flipped through the papers, one note stood out. It was written in my grandmother's shaky handwriting. "If Jenna finds this, it means I never confronted Elaine. She will destroy herself before she ever admits fault, but truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep it's buried." I sat back, the paper trembling in my hands. All those years I'd thought my mother's coldness came from disappointment in me, but it wasn't disappointment. It was fear. Fear that her lies might someday reach the light. I opened the leather journal next. The first few pages were daily musings, lists of appointments, mentions of Ethan visiting on weekends. But halfway through, the tone changed. Chloe came by today, asking for more money. She promised to pay it back, but I know she won't. She and Elaine have been talking too much lately. I think Chloe knows about the insurance policy. God forgive them both. Insurance policy. My heart thudded. I flipped to the next entry. If the policy is ever questioned, Jenna must know where to look. The documents are hidden behind the painting in the study. I glanced up at the wall, an old painting of the lake in summer. My hands shook as I lifted it from its hook. Behind it, taped to the wall, was a large envelope marked confidential. Inside were photocopies of insurance papers, notarized forms, and correspondence from a company I recognized, one that had processed Nora's life insurance after her passing. Except the signatures didn't match. I compared them against her real ones from earlier letters. These were forged by Chloe. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My mother had stolen. My sister had forged. Together, they'd drained my grandmother's security, pretending it was love while taking everything she had left. I gathered the documents and spread them across the desk. For a long time, I just stared at them, the fury rising like heat under my skin. But then something shifted. This wasn't just anger anymore, it was clarity. Everything Grandma had done, every letter, every hidden clue, it all led here. She had wanted me to see them for who they were, not just what they'd done. I photographed every page, then carefully locked the originals back in the drawer. This was no longer just about revenge, it was about justice. Outside, thunder rolled across the lake, distant but growing closer. The storm had arrived. I stood at the window, watching the waves crash against the frozen shore, and whispered, "They took everything from you, Grandma. I'll take everything back." The lightning flashed, illuminating the reflection of my face in the glass, calm, resolute, almost unrecognizable. Because the quiet girl they'd left no seat for at Christmas wasn't gone anymore. She was awake, and she was done being silent. The storm that had gathered over the lake didn't pass quickly, it lingered for days, as if waiting for me to act. By the time the skies finally cleared, I'd made my decision. The truth wasn't meant to stay buried in drawers and envelopes. It needed to be seen. My grandmother had been humiliated in silence, her kindness turned against her, and I had let my family treat me the same way for years, no more. The opportunity came sooner than expected. An email from Chloe arrived one morning, short and smug. "Don't forget the Christmas charity gala this weekend. The whole family will be there. It's still at the hotel ballroom, as always. Hope you'll be mature enough not to cause a scene." I stared at the screen for a long time before smiling to myself. I hadn't planned on attending, but if they wanted a scene, I'd give them one they'd never forget. That Saturday, I stood in front of the mirror in the lake house, adjusting the dark emerald dress I hadn't worn since nursing school graduation. My grandmother had loved this color. She used to say it made my eyes look fierce. I slipped the pendant she'd given me between my collarbones and whispered, "This is for you." The hotel lobby shimmered with gold and silver garlands. People were laughing, champagne glasses clinking, cameras flashing. It was everything my family thrived on: appearance, performance, control. Elaine and Chloe were at the center of it all, radiating practiced charm as they greeted donors and posed for photos. I waited until the speeches began. When the host called my mother up to thank guests for their continued generosity, I walked calmly through the crowd toward the stage. Murmurs rippled as I climbed the steps and stood beside her. Elaine froze mid-sentence. "Jenna?" she hissed under her breath. "What are you doing?" "Finishing what Grandma started," I said softly into the microphone. The room went silent. I wasn't planning to speak tonight. I began, my voice steady. "But I think it's time the truth finally had a turn." I handed a thick envelope to the event organizer. Inside were the forged documents, the proof of financial misconduct, the insurance fraud, every secret they'd buried. "These," I said, "belong to the foundation you claim to support." Elaine's smile collapsed. "This is absurd," she cried. "She's making things up." But Chloe's face told another story. She went pale, her hand trembling as she reached for her glass. The organizer opened the envelope, scanning the first few pages. His expression hardened. "Mrs. Miles, these are serious allegations." Whispers spread like wildfire. Reporters in the back lifted their cameras. Elaine's hands shook as she turned toward me, desperation cracking through her mask. "Jenna, please, not here." "Where else, Mom?" I said quietly. "You built your image on Grandma's money, on her suffering. You took everything she loved and called it family." Chloe's voice rose suddenly, shrill and panicked. "She forged those papers herself. She's jealous." I pulled another envelope from my bag, a notarized statement from Charles verifying the authenticity of the documents. "You should have stopped when you had the chance," I said. The flash of cameras filled the room. Elaine swayed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, without warning, she collapsed. The crowd screamed as people rushed forward. I stood frozen, the microphone still in my hand. For a moment, all I could see was the small, frail woman she had become beneath the armor of pride. A part of me wanted to kneel beside her, to help. The nurse in me itched to act. But the daughter in me, the daughter who'd been left standing with no seat, no love, no place, knew this was her doing. Paramedics were called. Chloe knelt beside her mother, sobbing. mascara streaking her cheeks. I stepped back, letting the chaos unfold. Reporters swarmed the stage. The room that once echoed with laughter now pulsed with scandal. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the mirrored pillars, poised, calm, unflinching. I didn't look like the invisible daughter anymore. I looked like the truth they never wanted to face. Outside, the winter air felt crisp, almost cleansing. I tilted my head toward the night sky, snowflakes melting on my lashes. It wasn't joy I felt. It wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, something inevitable. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it whispers through the cracks of everything you thought would never break. To be continued. The headlines hit the next morning. Local philanthropist accused of embezzlement. Charity gala scandal rocks Miles' family. Matriarch collapses amid inheritance dispute. The articles were everywhere online, on television, in the local paper that landed on my porch like a message from karma itself. I read them all once, then folded the paper neatly and left it on the counter. For years, my mother had controlled every story about our family. Now, for the first time, she couldn't control this one. Elaine was in the hospital. She'd suffered what the news called a stress-related cardiac episode. Chloe was by her side, of course, managing damage control like a soldier in a war she had started. Ethan tried calling me once, maybe twice, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I wasn't ready to hear him try to fix something that had never really been whole. The town turned on them faster than anyone expected. Donors withdrew from the family's charity, investors pulled funding from Chloe's business, and even Dad's old colleagues at the bank quietly distanced themselves. Their perfect Christmas card reputation unraveled in days. I stayed quiet through it all. I went to work. I smiled when my patients thanked me. I returned home to the lake house every night. Where silence didn't sting anymore, it soothed. Still, I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. One evening, while reviewing the remaining estate documents, my phone rang. It was Charles. "Miss Miles," he said gently, "I wanted to inform you that your grandmother's estate has been fully transferred to your name." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Thank you, Charles." "There's one more thing," he continued, his tone careful. "We discovered a sealed envelope labeled "For Jenna Final Wishes." It was stored in our archives, set to be delivered 1 month after the estate's activation. My breath caught. Another letter? Yes. I think it may provide closure. Or more clarity. We arranged to meet the following afternoon. That night I barely slept. I walked along the frozen shoreline behind the lake house, the moon reflecting off the ice like fractured glass. I thought about Grandma Nora, about her letters and her faith in me. I thought about the woman in the hospital bed, the same one who had once left me without a seat at her table. I wondered if she hated me now, or if deep down, she finally understood what she had done. The next day, I met Charles in his office. He handed me a small envelope sealed with a wax imprint of a rose, the same design that had been on the first box of letters. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten note and a smaller envelope beneath it. "My dearest Jenna, if you are reading this, it means you've done what I could not. You faced them. You showed them that silence has a cost. I am proud of you, though I know the burden of truth is heavy. What's inside the smaller envelope may change how you see everything, but remember this, I never wanted you to carry hate. Justice and vengeance are not the same thing. When you finish reading, choose peace, not ashes." I stared at the second envelope. It was thin, light, and yet it felt impossibly heavy in my hand. "What's inside?" I asked. Charles hesitated. "I haven't opened it, but your grandmother instructed that it be read only by you. In private." I nodded slowly and slipped it into my bag. "Thank you, Charles." As I stepped outside, a light snow began to fall, blanketing the parking lot in white. The world looked clean again, as if trying to wash away everything that had burned. Back at the lake house, I placed the envelope on the table. My pulse thudded in my ears as I stared at my name written in her careful cursive. For the final Christmas. My grandmother had left me one last secret, and I wasn't sure whether I was ready or afraid to open it. To be continued. I sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour, staring at the envelope marked "For the Final Christmas." The words were written in my grandmother's delicate cursive, but there was something about them, something heavier, almost mournful. The house was silent except for the soft crackle of the fire. Outside, the snow had started again, falling in slow, endless drifts that made the world look like it was holding its breath. Finally, I tore the seal open. Inside was a folded letter and a photograph. I picked up the photo first, a picture of my grandmother in her younger years, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. She looked a little like my mother, but softer, kinder, her smile less forced. On the back of the photograph were 3 words written in faded ink: "Your real mother." My heart stuttered. I turned to the letter, my hands trembling as I began to read. My beloved Jenna. There is one truth I could never bring myself to tell you in life. I wanted to spare you from pain. But life has a way of revealing what's hidden when the heart is strong enough to bear it. You are not Elaine's daughter by blood. You are mine by choice, but not by birth. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I blinked hard, forcing myself to keep reading. Your birth mother was Elaine's cousin, Marianne. She was young, frightened, and not ready to be a mother. When you were born, she asked me to raise you until she could stand on her own. But she never came back for you. Elaine resented you from the start. She saw you as a reminder of everything she didn't have. Patience, compassion, humility. She agreed to keep the truth, but her heart never accepted it. I feared that one day she would let that resentment turn cruel. And I was right. I pressed a hand to my mouth. My entire body felt weightless and heavy all at once, as though the ground beneath me had given way. I know you may feel betrayed, but you were never unwanted, Jenna. You were the light of my life, my second chance at love. You were mine in every way that mattered. I never told you because I didn't want you to feel like an outsider. But perhaps you already did, and I am sorry for that. The truth is not meant to wound, it is meant to free. I lowered the letter and stared at the fire. My chest ached in a way I couldn't describe. It wasn't just grief, it was understanding. All those years I'd wondered why my mother could never look at me with warmth, why her affection felt like obligation. It wasn't me she hated, it was the truth she'd buried. I turned the page. Elaine's cruelty came from fear, and fear can make people monstrous. But you, my sweet girl, have something she never will, grace. Do not let her sins poison your spirit. The estate, the letters, the truth, they were never about revenge. They were my way of giving you back what was taken, your power to choose who you will be. My tears fell freely now, splattering the ink. I reached the final lines. When Christmas comes again, do not mourn me. Light a candle, make yourself a place at the table. And remember this. Blood does not make a family, love does. And you, Jenna, were always my family. The room spun with emotion. I pressed the letter against my chest, sobbing quietly. The woman who had loved me most wasn't the one who gave me life, but the one who taught me how to live. For a moment, I wished she could have told me in person, that I could have held her hand and said thank you. But maybe this was the only way she could truly set me free. The storm outside grew louder, rattling the windows. I looked at the photograph again, at the 2 women whose choices had defined my entire life. And as the firelight flickered across the letter, I realized something that made my breath catch. My revenge had destroyed the family who had rejected me, but in doing so, I had also burned the bridge to the truth of who I was. To be continued. The world felt strangely still after reading that letter. For 2 days, I drifted through the lake house in a kind of trance, half haunted, half liberated. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of wind against the windows seemed to echo my grandmother's words. Blood does not make a family, love does. I told myself I'd found peace, but deep down, I knew the truth wasn't finished with me yet. The silence was only the pause before the storm. It came on a Thursday night. I was sitting by the fire, rereading Nora's final letter, when a sharp knock rattled the front door. My stomach tightened instantly. The knock came again, louder this time, impatient. When I opened the door, my mother stood there. Elaine looked nothing like the woman who used to glide through parties in tailored dresses and pearls. Her hair was uncombed, her eyes hollow, her coat hanging off her shoulders like a forgotten costume. For a second, I didn't recognize her. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice cracked and trembling. I stepped aside, wordless. She brushed past me, her perfume faintly clinging to her like a ghost of the life she used to lead. The silence between us was unbearable. Finally, I said, "I heard you were out of the hospital." Her laugh was bitter. "Of course you did. Everyone has. The nurse who destroyed her own family, it's quite the headline, isn't it?" I folded my arms. "I didn't destroy anything, Mom. You did that yourself." She turned to face me, her eyes wild. "You think you're better than me now? Because of that old woman's money?" "That old woman," I said sharply, "was the only person who ever showed me real love." Her lips trembled. "She poisoned you against me." I almost laughed. "You didn't need her help for that." Elaine stepped closer, her hands shaking. "You've ruined my life, Jenna. Everything I built gone. Chloe won't speak to me. Ethan's ashamed to be seen with me. The charity's finished. You've taken everything." "You took it first," I whispered. "From her. From me. You stole her peace, and you made me believe I was never enough." For a moment I thought she might hit me again. But instead, she just stared at me, her face twisting into something I'd never seen before. Desperation, maybe, or something darker. "I should have never taken you in," she spat suddenly. "You weren't even mine to begin with." The words cut through me like glass, even though I already knew them. "I know," I said softly. "Grandma told me everything." That stopped her. She froze, color draining from her face. She told you? She told me who I am, who my mother really was, and she told me something else, that you've lived your whole life afraid. Afraid of love, afraid of truth, afraid of losing control." Her hands balled into fists. "You think this makes you the hero? You think that letter changes what you've done?" "I didn't do this to hurt you," I said, my voice steady. "I did it because you hurt everyone around you and you needed to face it." She turned toward the door, her voice rising. "You've cursed this family, Jenna. Do you hear me? You've brought shame and ruin and—" She broke off, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then she said it, the last thing I ever heard her say to me. "I hope you're proud of yourself when there's nothing left standing." And then she was gone. The door slammed behind her, rattling the windows. I stood there for a long time, the sound echoing through the empty house. Outside, wind screamed through the trees, carrying snow and branches across the frozen lake. I didn't know it yet, but those would be her last words to me. Hours later, I woke to the faint scent of smoke. I stumbled to the window and froze. In the distance, beyond the lake, an orange glow lit the horizon. The old family home was burning. Flames clawed into the sky, devouring the roof, the walls, the history that had once defined us. Sirens wailed in the distance, but I already knew it was too late. Elaine's words came back to me like a curse. "When there's nothing left standing." I pressed a trembling hand to the glass, my reflection flickering against the fire's glow. I had wanted justice. But standing there, watching everything turn to ash, I realized something else. Sometimes justice doesn't choose who it saves. To be continued. The fire burned through the night, painting the horizon in shades of orange and black. Even from across the frozen lake, I could hear the crackle of collapsing wood, the faint screams of sirens, the chaos swallowing what was once our home. I stood by the window of the lake house until the glow dimmed into smoke, until the snow began to fall again and covered the ruins in a white so pure it almost felt cruel. By morning, the world was quiet. The local news confirmed what I already feared: Elaine had been found inside. The fire marshal suspected it started near the fireplace, though no one could explain why she'd been there alone. Chloe refused to speak to reporters, and Ethan's brief statement asked for privacy during this difficult time. But privacy had never been a luxury in our family. The Miles name had become gossip currency, a cautionary tale whispered in grocery aisles and coffee shops. I didn't attend the funeral. I couldn't. Instead, I spent that morning at the lake, where the air was so still that even the trees seemed to hold their breath. I threw a handful of white roses into the water, watching them drift under the thin layer of ice. "I hope you found peace," I whispered. Even if it came too late, for the first time in months, I let myself cry not out of anger or guilt, but for everything that might have been. For the girl who wanted a mother's love, for the woman who tried to earn it, for the family that never learned what love truly meant. The papers eventually stopped printing our story. The gossip faded as the next scandal took its place. Chloe sold what remained of her possessions and left town with Ryan. Ethan moved states away, sending me a short letter saying he was sorry for everything. I never wrote back. Some silences are better left unbroken. Days became weeks, and slowly, the rhythm of life returned. The hospital called, offering me a promotion I hadn't expected. "You've always been dependable, Jenna," my supervisor said. "You deserve this." For the first time in a long while, I believed her. The lake house became my refuge. I spent my evenings reading Nora's old journals, planting small flowers by the porch, and repainting the faded walls. It was the first home that truly felt like mine. The stillness no longer frightened me, it comforted me. One afternoon, while organizing the attic, I found a small wooden box tucked behind a stack of dusty photo albums. Inside were mementos, my childhood drawings, a lock of my hair tied with ribbon, and a Christmas card I didn't remember writing. It was addressed to Grandma Nora, written in the uneven scrawl of a 7-year-old. The card said, "Dear Grandma, I wish they'd see me the way you do. I'll try to be good so they love me next year. Merry Christmas." My chest tightened. I sat there in the quiet attic, clutching that card like it was a heartbeat. So many years I'd tried to earn what should have been freely given. But as I stared at my small, hopeful handwriting, I realized something simple and devastating. I didn't need their love anymore. I had already built something stronger, self-worth, hard-won, and unshakable. That night, I walked down to the lake again. The snow was falling softly, the air cold enough to sting. I lit a single candle, placed it near the shore, and whispered, "I'm free, Grandma." The flame flickered in the wind, but it didn't go out. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a figure in the distance, standing by the road. For a heartbeat, I thought it was my mother, the outline familiar, haunting, but when I blinked, the space was empty again, only snow swirling in the night. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe some part of her spirit had come to see the peace she never could find in life. Either way, I didn't look back, because some ghosts aren't meant to be feared. They're meant to remind us that we survived, to be continued. A year passed before I realized I wasn't counting time anymore. Seasons slipped quietly into one another, each one softening the sharp edges of everything that had come before. The lake house had transformed with me, fresh paint on the walls, curtains that caught the light, a garden of wildflowers that bloomed every spring and faded gracefully each autumn. It was no longer a place haunted by secrets. It had become a sanctuary built on truth. That December, I decorated for Christmas for the first time in years. Not the way my mother used to, with expensive ornaments and rehearsed perfection, but simply a small tree in the corner, handmade garlands, a wreath of pine and lavender on the door. The smell of cinnamon and sugar drifted from the oven, filling the house with warmth that felt earned rather than expected. As snow began to fall outside, I set the dining table with quiet care. One plate, one candle, one chair. For me, for so many years, I'd been defined by the empty chair that had waited for me at someone else's table. Now, the space I created was entirely my own, no longer a symbol of exclusion, but of arrival. I poured myself a glass of wine and looked around the room. The flicker of candlelight danced against the framed photograph of my grandmother on the mantel. I smiled. "Merry Christmas, Grandma," I whispered. That's when I heard the knock. It was soft, almost hesitant. I froze for a moment, heart quickening. Few people ever came out this far to the lake. I opened the door, and a woman stood on the porch, bundled in a heavy coat, snow caught in her hair. She looked to be in her late 50s, kind eyes framed by lines of time and compassion. "Are you Jenna Miles?" she asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "Can I help you?" She smiled faintly and held out a small wooden box tied with twine. "My name is Clara Evans. I worked as your grandmother Nora's caretaker during her final months. She asked me to deliver this to you when the first snow fell a year after her passing." I blinked, taken aback. "A year? She planned even this?" Clara nodded. "She said you'd understand when the time was right." My throat tightened. "Would you like to come in?" She shook her head gently. "No, dear. This moment is meant for you." After she left, I set the box on the table beside the candle. My hands shook as I untied the twine. Inside was a folded letter and a small, faded photograph of me as a child sitting on Grandma's lap, both of us laughing. Beneath it, a single silver charm shaped like a heart half tarnished, half shining. The letter read, "My darling Jenna, if this has reached you, it means another Christmas has come, and you are still standing just as I knew you would. I hope by now you have learned what all the years could not teach our family, that strength without love is hollow, and love without courage is fragile. The heart in this box is mine. I wore it every Christmas after you were born. Now it belongs to you. Let it remind you that no matter what they took, no matter who tried to erase your worth, you were always enough. Always. Live well, my dear girl. Laugh loudly. And when you sit at your table, know that I am there with you not in memory, but in peace." Tears blurred the words as I finished reading. I clasped the charm in my palm, feeling its cool weight. For the first time, it didn't hurt to remember. It healed. I placed the charm beside my plate, lit a second candle, and raised my glass toward the photograph on the mantel. "To family," I whispered. "The kind we choose." Outside, the snow fell heavier, soft and endless. The wind hummed through the pines like a lullaby. Inside, the fire crackled gently, the shadows warm and forgiving, and as I sat alone yet not alone, I realized the circle was complete. They had left me no seat once, but I had built my own table, and at last, I had found peace there.